Darren opened his eyes to smoke and flickering light. His head was pounding and his body felt heavy, as if someone had dropped a mountain on top of him. The seat belt across his chest was torn, and sparks flew from a broken panel nearby. He pushed himself up slowly and looked around the shattered interior of the escape pod. The main ship was gone. He had seen the explosion just before being ejected into the atmosphere of an unknown planet. Pod had landed in the middle of thick jungle outside the window. He saw tall trees with silver blue leaves and vines that glowed faintly in the shadows. Everything felt quiet. There was no sound of birds or insects, only the low hum of the wind pushing through the treetops. Darren forced open the hatch and stepped out. His boots sank into soft moss and thick roots. The air was warm and carried a sweet scent like ripe fruit. The jungle looked alive, but it was completely still. No movement, no noise. He grabbed a small bag from the pod. Before it caught fire, inside were a few rations, a survival tablet, and a broken comm unit. No signal, no contact. He was alone, at least for now. Began walking away from the smoke. He needed water, shelter, and a way to mark his position in case rescue ever came. The trees were massive, some wider than houses, and their trunks bent and twisted like giant ropes. He passed strange plants with crystal-like petals and wide leaves that folded as he moved near. After hours of walking, Darren found a small stream. The water was clear and cold, and he drank from it gratefully. He sat under a thick tree and tried to catch his breath. He looked up at the sky through a break in the canopy. 3 moons were visible, all hanging low and bright. This planet was nothing like Earth. At night, he built a small shelter using branches and vines. He lit a fire with the emergency spark tool from his kit. He tried not to think of his crew. He had not seen any other pods eject. They were probably gone. Fire crackled and filled the silence with some comfort, but as the night deepened, he noticed something strange. The jungle was not truly quiet. It was listening. He could feel it, like 1,000 eyes watching him through the trees. The next morning, he decided to explore further. He climbed a hill covered in moss and reached the top. By midday from there, he saw a strange pattern below, rocks arranged in perfect circles deep in the forest. They looked too precise to be natural. Darren moved carefully. His steps were quiet, and his eyes scanned the area constantly. As he got closer, he found signs of intelligent life. Old tools made of crystal, woven cloth hanging from branches, symbols carved into the bark of trees. He knew this was no abandoned site. Someone still lived here. Maybe many. Sumyanesh kept moving, but stayed cautious. Soon he found a trail marked with colored stones and soft footprints. They were larger than human, but still graceful. Light pressure, narrow heels thin. He heard a soft whisper behind him. He turned quickly. Nothing again. This time to the side. Still nothing. Turned back to the path and found himself surrounded. A figure stood in silence. Their skin was smooth like polished stone, and their eyes were silver. Each of them held a slender spear carved with glowing symbols. They wore clothes made from woven leaves and soft fabric that moved like water. Darren raised his hand slowly. He tried to speak, but they said nothing. They studied him carefully, then motioned for him to follow, nodded, and walked with them. He knew resistance would be foolish, and honestly, he was too tired to argue. They led him deeper into the jungle, farther than he had gone, past trees with lantern-like pods hanging from the branches, past bridges made of living vines, until they reached a wide clearing. There stood their village, houses built into the trees, platforms connected by ropes, fires burning in bowls of stone. It was beautiful and quiet, and unlike anything he had ever seen. In the center of the village stood a taller woman. Her eyes were the same silver, and her presence felt strong. She wore a band across her forehead and held a long staff with carvings at the top. She stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was soft but clear. The words were not from any language Darren knew, but they carried meaning in tone and rhythm. She pointed at him, then at the sky, then touched her heart. Understood only one thing. They had been waiting for someone, and they believed it was him. Looked around at the silent tribe, their faces calm but serious. They were not afraid of him. They were curious, and they were watching for what he would do next. Darren took a breath. He nodded slowly and lowered his eyes in respect. Whatever happened from this moment, he was no longer just a mechanic from a broken cargo ship. He was part of something older, something waiting in the forest for a reason to begin again. Darren stood in the middle of the village with the tribe around him. The tall woman who had spoken to him raised her hand. The others lowered their weapons and slowly moved away. She stepped closer and touched her chest with her hand. Thena, she said. Slowly Darren understood she was giving her name. He repeated it with care. Thena. She nodded, then pointed at him, placed his hand on his own chest. Darren. Thena repeated his name. With a slight accent, the sound of it rolled softly in her voice. There was no fear in her eyes, only thought, as if she was trying to read everything inside him. Just by looking at him, one of the others came forward. She was younger. She carried a shallow bowl with fruit and water. She had hair like dark silk braided with beads. She placed the bowl near Darren's feet, then stepped back quietly. Darren sat on the wooden platform and ate slowly. The fruit tasted like a mix of pear and honey. The water was cold and clean. The tribe watched in silence. Every move he made seemed to mean something to Themlitter. They gave him a small place to rest, a hut built high in the tree branches connected by strong vines. It had a mat made from soft leaves and walls woven from light wood. Darren sat in the hut and looked out over the village. He saw children running, women weaving cloth, elders carving shapes into stones. The place was peaceful, but full of rules he did not understand. He knew he had to learn fast if he wanted to survive. If next morning Thena returned this time, she brought a small book made from thin bark. On each page were symbols and pictures. She pointed to a tree, then showed him the mark for it. She pointed to water, then showed him the symbol for that too. She was teaching him their language slowly and with patience. Cities passed. Darren helped gather wood and clean tools. He learned simple words: tree, food, water, fire. Thank you, Saf. The tribe began to accept him. Some of the women even smiled when they saw him. One of them was Leary. She was tall and sharp-eyed. A hunter, she watched him like a hawk watches a mouse. But over time her gaze softened. Another was Nyla, a quiet healer with a calm voice. She often came to check his hands after work. She gave him healing leaves when he got a scratch or burn. Never felt alone anymore, but he still felt like an outsider. On evening, Thena took him to the edge of the village. There stood a large stone with glowing lines carved across its surface. She placed her hand on it and looked at him. She began to speak. In a mix of her words and the few he had learned long ago, she said, our people lived with both male and female, but the sky burned, the sickness came, the males died, the forest changed. Since then, only we remain. She touched the stone again. This stone remembers. It shows the one who comes from the sky, who brings change and life. Fesh pointed at the stars, then at him, then placed her hand over her heart. Darren listened carefully. He did not understand everything, but he understood and all he believed. He was part of an old promise, a person from the stars who would help rebuild what was lost. He wanted to ask questions, so many, but he lacked the words, so he stayed quiet and respectful. The next day he worked beside Leary. They built a new shelter. She showed him how to tie the vines tight, how to shape the walls so the wind could not pass through. Her hands were fast and skilled. She never spoke much, but sometimes he caught her looking at him when she thought he was not watching. That night, there was a gathering in the village center. Fires were lit. Drums made from hollow wood beat a steady rhythm. The tribe danced in slow circles. Their bodies moved like leaves in the wind. Thena stepped forward and began to chant. The words were ancient and strong. The people repeated the lines after her. Their voices joined like waves. Then she called Darren forward. He stepped into the circle. Unsure of what was happening, Thena held up a carved stone. It was shaped like a flame with a hole in the center. She placed it in his hand. Choice, she said, looked at the stone, then at her. Then at the crowd, nodded slowly. They had given him a place, a chance, a path forward, and now they waited to see what he would do with it. At night, as he lay in his hut, he stared at the stars through the leaves. He thought of the ship, his crew, the endless silence after the crash, and now this. A people with stories, with memory, with hope. They had chosen to believe in him. He had to find out why and what it truly means. Held the flame-shaped stone close and closed his ice. The jungle no longer felt like a trap. It felt like it was holding something waiting to wake. The morning mist hung low over the village. As Darren stepped out of his hut, he could smell wood smoke and fresh fruit from the cooking area. Children chased each other near the tree roots and laughed as they ran barefoot over soft moss. It was a peaceful sight, one he had never expected to see on this strange world. Thena greeted him at the steps and gestured for him to follow. They walked through a narrow path lined with carved stones, each one marked with symbols and shapes he had seen before in the language book she had given him. At the end of the path stood a round structure. Its walls were made of living vines shaped like ribs. Inside it was dark and cool. A soft light came from glowing insects trapped inside hanging glass. This was the memory house. Athena stepped inside and waited for Darren. He followed quietly inside the house were tall pillars carved with images. Some showed scenes of the Yilari tribe planting trees and fishing from rivers. Others showed the tribe standing beside males who looked similar in shape, but with different markings on their skin. There were no males in the village now. Darren had asked about them once. The answer had been quiet, but clear. Gone during the time of sickness. Athena placed her hand on one of the carvings. It showed a figure falling from the sky surrounded by fire. She looked at Darren and spoke slowly. From sky comes the one heart open, hands of change. He walks alone, but brings many. Darren repeated the words they were part of. A prophecy, one that had lasted for generations, led him to a table made from black stone. On it lay tools made from crystal and wood. A small mechanical device sat among them. It was broken, but familiar. A water purifier and picked it up. The design was simple, a model used on mining colonies long ago. He checked the parts and found the main seal had dried out. Asked for glue and clean fiber. Athena watched as he worked piece by piece. He restored the filter, then poured in water from a nearby jug. It came out clean and safe. Athena smiled, not a small smile, but a full one that lit up her entire face. Others came to see. Word spread through the village. The old purifier had been broken for many years. No one remembered how it worked. No, it worked. Again that evening, Athena invited Darren to sit beside her at the main fire. She handed him a carved bowl of roasted root vegetables and meat from the river creatures they hunted. The people watched him, not with suspicion, but with respect. Was helping, not with weapons, not with commands, but with his hands, his knowledge, his career. Over the next few days, Darren was allowed to explore more of the village. He visited the weavers and learned how the cloth was made from thread pulled from tree bark. He helped the hunters carry supplies and joined Nyla as she collected healing herbs and day. While helping her, she pointed to a small stone circle hidden near the roots of a giant tree. In the center of the circle lay a flat stone covered in ancient markings. Nyala explained that this was the place of vows, where bonds were made between two or more, not by force, but by shared trust and promise. Erin listened carefully. Each word she shared painted a picture of how the Yilari chose their paths. Their tribe was strong not because of power, but because of unity. That night, there was no music in the village. Instead, there was quiet conversation and thoughtful work. The stars were bright, and the 3 moons formed a triangle in the sky. Darren sat alone on a platform watching the stars. When Lyri approached, she sat beside him. Without speaking for a while, they said nothing, only the sounds of the wind and distant river filled the air. Then Lyri spoke. You fix things, but not just tools. You fix silence, you fix fear. Darren looked at her. Her voice was not soft. It was steady, like the sound of stone being shaped. You came with nothing. Now many wait when you speak. He shook his head. I am not special. I only help. Lyri placed something in his hand. It was a small carved bead shaped like a leaf, a gift. She said no words, just choice. She stood and left, leaving him alone. Again, Darren held the bead. It was simple, but he knew it meant something far deeper. The next morning, Athena called a village circle. All members of the tribe gathered. Fires were lit. Voices fell. Silence stood before them with the old prophecy stone. She told them that the time of silence was ending, that the one from the stars had come not to rule but to restore, that he had brought change not with command but with care. Then she stepped aside and looked at Darren. It was his. The fire cracked in the center of the circle. All eyes were on Darren as he stood before the tribe. The stone in his hand felt warm from his grip. He looked around at the faces that no longer saw him. As the stranger spoke slowly, his words were still, rough in the Yilari tongue, but clear enough to understand. I came from the sky by accident. I was broken, lost, but you gave me a place, you gave me food, you gave me a name again. Now I want to give something back. He lifted the stone given to him by Athena, then held up the carved bead from Lyri. I do not know the future, but I choose to walk with you, to build, to help, to stay. The silence broke with gentle murmurs of approval. Athena nodded with calm pride. Lyri stood in the shadows, her arms crossed, but there was a faint smile on her face. The ceremony ended quietly, no loud cheers, only peaceful acceptance. Darren had made his choice. He was one of them now. In the days that followed, life returned to its steady rhythm, but there was a change. The People no longer stepped back when Darren passed. They greeted him, shared food, asked for his help with tools, and repairs work beside the healers. He built new platforms in the trees. He added small inventions using scrap from his broken pod lights, powered by movement rain collectors made from shaped leaves, and crystal funnels. Each small thing made life easier, and each gift deepened his place among the yellow forest around them. Was not without danger once a week hunters left to patrol. The deeper jungles, creatures larger than any earth animal roamed there. The tribe used sound traps and scent trails to keep them away. On evening, a loud horn echoed from the forest edge. A warning: hunters returned early. One of them had been injured by a beast with thick fur and glowing eyes. The wound was deep, and the usual leaf medicines were not. Anyala called for Darren. He rushed to the healing hut. The injured hunter was breathing hard. Blood covered his side. Nyla showed Darren the wound. The beast's claw had left a long cut across the ribs. Darren opened his survival tablet. Inside were emergency patches, strong cloth soaked in healing gel. He cleaned the wound and sealed it, then wrapped it tight. Nyala watched closely. She had never seen such tools, but she understood quickly. She repeated the steps. As Darren showed Herbie morning, the hunter was resting calmly. His fever had dropped. Nyla placed her hand on Darren's shoulder and gave a small bow. You carry old power, not magic, but memory. You help us remember that night. Rain fell from the sky like a curtain, heavy and steady. The tribe gathered in the center huts where fires kept everyone warm. A soft drum beat began. It was not a celebration, it was something older. A moment of reflection. Thena stepped into the center and began to chant, her voice low and steady. Others joined her one by one. Even the children hummed the rhythm. Leary came to Darren and motioned for him to stand. She handed him a carved mask, a tradition. During rain gatherings, he placed it over his face and followed her into the circle together. They moved with the rhythm, slow steps in a wide spiral, not dancing for joy, but dancing for memory, for those lost, for those returning. Grain soaked their clothes, but no one left the circle. It was a reminder that the sky watched them, that water brought life, that fire brought warmth. When the circle ended, Leary removed her mask and looked at Darren. You do not belong to the stars anymore, she said. You belong to the roots now. He did not answer with words. He only nodded. Later, Thena called him to the old memory house. She showed him a new carving, fresh lines on one of the tall stones. It showed a figure with tools in hand standing beside the tribe. Between fire and rain, you are part of the story now, she said. This will stay long after we are gone. Darren touched the carving. He felt the weight of it, not as a burden, but as a promise to be. For he left. Thena placed a new stone in his hand. It was shaped like a tree with 3 branches. Next season you must decide where the branches grow. Darren did not understand at first, but as he walked back through the village, watching the people he had come to care for, he began to see what she meant. Tribe had chosen him not just as a guest, but as a part of their future, a root for something new. Children ran past him, their laughter mixing with the last drops of rain from the leaves above. He smiled quietly, knowing the storm had passed, but the real journey was just beginning. The season changed as the wind shifted. The leaves in the forest turned darker. Bird-like creatures began nesting closer to the trees. It was the beginning of the growth moon, a time the Yulari called the waiting. bloomer and worked from sunrise to dusk. He had become more than a helper. He was now part of the daily life of the tribe. The huts he built stayed firm during storms. The tools he repaired worked better than before. Even the children came to him when something broke, but a quiet change had begun within the tribe. The women whispered during gatherings. Elders spoke in slow tones. Gifts were passed from one hand to another, not loud, not rushed, just careful steps towards something old. Returning, Thena called Darren to the sacred tree. One morning she stood beside the great roots with a calm face. It is time, she said. You have walked our paths, eaten our food, learned our way. Now you must understand your place in the new branch. Darren listened. He had heard the word branch before, but now it carried deeper meaning. Thena continued. Our tribe once had males, not many, but enough to share in the building, the healing, the planting, the songs when they were lost. We did not forget them. We waited. The stars said one would return, not to rule, but to give us a path. Again Darren stood still. He felt the weight of her words. He had not come to lead or change anything. He only wanted to survive. But now he had become more than a visitor. Thena held out a folded cloth. Inside were carved beads. Each one held a symbol for a different member of the tribe. She picked 3 beads, one for Nyla, one for Leary, and one for a soft-spoken woman named Enna, who worked with the plants. These have chosen to share your branch. If you agree, you must accept their stone and walk beside them during the growth moon. The choice is yours, we ask with hope. Not with force. Darren sat beneath the tree for a long time after she left. He rolled the beads between his fingers. Each one held a name. Alifa. Future. He remembered how Nyla stayed by his side when he was injured, how Leary taught him to hold a bough, how Enna brought him fruit every morning. Without speaking a word, they had not asked him to be a leader. They had asked for trust, for a future built together. That night, Darren went to Nyla first. She sat near the garden sorting dried herbs. He placed the bead in her hand. She looked at him and smiled without speaking. Then he found Enna. She was by the water, washing soft leaves. She saw the bead and placed her hand over his last. He found Leary. She was sharpening her spear under the moonlight. He sat beside her for a moment. He said nothing. Then he held out the bead. She stared at it, then nodded. One scene. No celebration followed, no loud talk or dancing, only soft smiles and understanding. Or the next few days, the women came to him with gifts. A carved comb, a new mat, a fresh woven shirt. They worked beside him as they always had. But now there was something more between them, a shared purpose, a quiet promise. The elders watched from a distance, some with smiles, some with thoughtful eyes. The younger ones watched too, learning how the old customs returned, but in new shapes. Children asked Darren to tell stories. He told them about the stars, about machines that floated without wings, about snow that fell on mountains too tall to climb. They listened with wide eyes. Their questions never stopped. He answered everyone with patience, knowing these children were part of the reason he stayed on. Evening, the sky turned red. A rare light filled the village. The tribe gathered in silence. Thena stood beside Darren and placed her staff in the ground. The sky burns with the old fire. She said it means the branch has taken root. From that day, the tribe began preparing new huts. They planted more seeds. They carved more memory stones. The village was growing not in size, but in spirit. Nyala began teaching others how to use the healing gel from Darren's tools. Enna planted fruits from seeds brought by birds. Leary trained the younger hunters in silence and strength. Each of them shared what they had, and Darren stood with them, not above, not behind, but beside it. One night, a soft cry came from the healing hut. A new voice had entered the village, a child born from the union of 2 paths. The elders lit a small fire and thanked the forest. Darren held the child in his arms. The next morning, the baby's eyes were like the sky after rain, soft but clear, strong. But Count Thena looked at him and spoke in a firm voice. Legacy is not about blood, it is about choice. And you have chosen. Now your legacy walks in small steps beside you. Darren did not speak. He only held the child close and looked up at the canopy. Sunlight passed through the leaves like soft gold. Had come to this world with nothing. Now he was part of something far greater. The child yawned. The village breathed, and life moved forward without rush or fear. The days grew longer and warmer. The forest was full of sound. The young ones played near the water. The gardens were rich with fruit. The air smelled of wet leaves and firewood. Darren had never felt such peace. He walked through the village each day with quiet purpose. He helped build stronger huts, taught the children how to read the stars, shared tools and skills with anyone who wished to learn. Leary and Nyla worked with him often. Enna stayed by the gardens, but joined him for meals. The bond between them was not loud or showy. It was steady. It was real. The child that had been born weeks ago was growing fast. He was healthy and bright. The village named him Maru. Darren did not ask whose blood ran in the child. It did not matter. Maru was part of all of Themon. Clear morning, while Darren repaired a wooden bridge over a shallow stream, a strange humming filled the air. It came from above, not like the wind, not like the birds. Something sharper looked up. His breath caught in his chest. A ship was breaking through the clouds, metal wings, engines glowing. A patrol craft from the human colonialist ship circled once, then slowly descended into a clearing. Beyond the forest line, the village grew silent. Many had never seen anything like it. Others looked at Darren with worried eyes. Thena walked to him calmly, her staff in hand. You know them, she said. He nodded. Yes, they are from my world. Will they harm us? She asked. I will not let them, he said. She did not smile, but she placed a hand on his shoulder. Then speak with truth. Darren walked with 2 others toward the landing site. When he reached the clearing, the patrol ship was still, its doors open with a hiss. A man in a gray suit stepped out. Behind him were 2 others, all War badges from the Outer Reach Survey Unit. One of them paused when he saw Darren. Darren Wells, you are alive. Darren gave a slow nod. I survived the crash. I found the Yellari. They saved me. I stayed. The officer stepped forward. I'm Commander Bren. We received your old distress signal. We expected a wreck, not this. He looked past Darren, saw the trees. Heard the distant drum of the village. You have built a home here. I have joined a home. That already existed, Darren said. The Yellari are not. While they are wise, they are peaceful. They are my family now. Commander Bren looked at his data pad. You understand that this world is unmarked, unclaimed by any known colony technically. It belongs to the Survey Authority. We are expected to report any population or valuable resource. Darren's eyes narrowed. You will not take this place. You will not break what has been rebuilt with care. These people are not samples, not data. They are lives. The commander studied him. You speak as one of them. Not as one of us. Then maybe your us needs to change. Darren replied. A long silence followed. The other officers stood quiet. Finally, Bren stepped back. We will log this world as observed. No contact will be forced. No claim will be filed. But if they ever wish to speak with the colonies, you may guide them. You are our link now. Darren nodded. He turned and walked back toward the village. The officers did not follow. The ship lifted off an hour later and vanished into the clouds. When he returned, Thena waited for him near the fire circle. They have gone, she said. Yes, they will not return. Unless we ask. You could have gone with them, she said. I have already chosen. He replied. Leary approached with Mara in her arms. Nyla stood beside her. Anna brought fresh water. Thena looked at all of them, then at Darren, then the bond holds. Even with sky watchers above. That evening the village held a quiet meal. No big gathering, no feast. Just calm thanks for what had been protected, and sat with the others as the stars appeared. He looked up at the sky. A piece of his old world had returned. But he had not left with it. Children gathered near his feet. One asked, are there many stars? Yes, more than I can count. Will we go there one day? Maybe. If the time is right, and if we stay here. Darren woke before sunrise. The sky was still deep blue, with the last stars fading slowly. The jungle around the village moved with soft sounds. Leaves shook gently as small creatures climbed through the trees. It had been a full season since the patrol ship left. No signal, no visitors, just life continuing as it always had. Sat outside his hut and watched the first rays of light fall across the wooden platforms. The village was calm. He could hear someone sharpening a tool. Children whispering near the fire pit. The rhythm of peace. Muru came running up the path, with his short legs carrying him fast. He was growing quickly and had learned to climb like a squirrel. He stopped at Darren's feet and held out a carved stick. With pride, I made it, he said with a grin, and took the stick and examined it. Straight, smooth, carved with little marks and spirals. You did well, he said. Is it for hunting or walking? Both, Mara said with a nod, and handed it back. Mara ran off to show the others. The boy reminded Darren of the crew he had lost, of the cold, empty ship, of the crash. But the pain no longer controlled him. He had made peace with the past. Later in the morning, Thena called for a gathering near the great tree. The village came together and sat in a wide circle. The air smelled of fruit and wood smoke. Elders placed carved stones in front of the group. Each stone marked a moment in their story. Thena stood with her staff in hand. She looked around the circle and then at Darren. A new branch has grown, she said. Not from fear, not from power, but from fire shared with care. We will now place a new stone to mark the day the flame returned to our people. She turned to Darren and handed him a smooth, dark stone. Its surface was carved with a simple symbol of flame rising from 3 roots. This is yours, she said. Place it in the circle. Your name will live in the story of the forest. Darren stepped forward. He walked to the center and knelt. He placed the stone between 2 older ones. One showed the last time a child was born before the sickness. The other marked the great silent Seno. His stone sat between them, a reminder of the beginning. After the end, tribe hummed together, a sound like wind through tall trees. It was a song of thanks. When the ceremony ended, Leary brought him a new robe woven with green and silver thread. Nyla handed him a pouch of healing powder she had made with his help. Anna gave him a bundle of seeds. These are for when the rains return, she said, so the ground will remember what you planted. Darren accepted the gifts with quiet respect. Later that evening, he walked the edge of the forest alone. He needed space to think. He looked at the trees, tall and strong. He looked at the sky, clear and endless. It had left a message inside a stone tower. Near the patrol landing site, if any ship returned one day, they would find it said only one thing. We are not waiting to be saved, we are already home back. In the village, the fires burned low, the children were asleep. The adults sat together sharing soft words, and Story Esmar rested against Darren's side half asleep. Holding a wooden animal toy made by the carver, Sthena sat across the fire and watched. With calm eyes, she spoke after a long pause. You came to us by accident, but you stayed by choice. Now your name is carved in stone, but more than that, it lives in the ones who carry your lessons. Darren looked around the circle. He saw the young builders copying his designs. He saw the healers using tools he had repaired. He saw hunters wearing belts he had made with Leary. He saw hope. We were afraid we would fade, Athena said, but now we grow again, and the forest does not forget those who help it bloom. Darren felt no need to answer. The silence was enough. As the fire cracked gently, Nyla leaned close and asked, do you ever think of going back to the sky? He looked up, thought for a moment, then shook his head. I came from the stars, but everything I needed was already here. She smiled, then stood and helped Maru to his feet. The boy yawned, rubbed his eyes, and looked at Darren. Tell me a story before I sleep. Darren nodded. He carried Maru to the hut, lit a small lamp, and sat beside him, began with soft words. There was once a man who fell from the sky. He thought he was alone. He thought everything was lost, but then he found a village of people who lived with trees and stars, and they gave him something no ship ever could, a reason to stay. Maru closed his eyes and drifted to sleep with a smile. Darren stepped outside. The moons were rising. The sky full of silver light. Breathed deep and closed his eyes. For a moment they was no longer just a man from another world. He was part of this one, and in the heart of the forest, the earthburn flame burned steady.